Hello everyone, we are Group 1 and we are going to be presenting on IAS 41, which has to do with agriculture. So let's get into it. So the objective of IAS 41, which you can find in paragraph 1, is to provide the standard on how to account for and appropriately disclose agricultural activity. So you may be asking yourself, what is included in agricultural activity? Well, first off, we got biological assets. This can include a firm's sheep, cows, pigs, tobacco plants, anything along those sorts of lines. Obviously, the list goes on. Next up, we got agricultural produce at the point of harvest. This can include wool, milk, we got fruits, picked grapes. Once again, the list can go on. And then the final thing we got is government grants associated with those biological assets. So when we're talking about agricultural activity, those are going to be included. To get a little more in-depth about agricultural activity, it refers to the change in biological assets, such as plants and animals, into biological produce that is collected from the establishment's biological assets. So the example that I like to use is a firm's cow, that is going to be the biological asset, and the milk that is collected from the cow, that is going to be the biological produce. However, we must note from IAS 41, paragraph 3, that agricultural activity does not refer to the processing of biological produce after harvest. So an example of this is the milk collected, processed into cheese, wool processed into carpet, or logs processed into lumber. So the carpet, the lumber, the cheese that was processed is not going to be included under agricultural activity in this standard.
For disclosure, it's important to distinguish what falls within the scope of IAS 41. We went over biological assets and produce, but there also exists a type of plant that is integral to agricultural activity that does not fall within the scope. Those would be bearer plants. To be classified as a bearer plant, a living plant must be used in production or supply of produce, be expected to bear produce for 2+ periods, and have a low chance of being sold unless for scrap. For example, we have a vineyard here that produces wine. The grapevines are classified as bearers since they meet those conditions. They produce grapes, are expected to bear our produce, grapes, for more than one period, and are not expected to be sold anytime soon. As mentioned earlier, since wine is processed from the grapes, our produce, it is not within the scope of IAS 41.
So now I'm going to be talking about recognition and measurement. This can be found in IAS 41, section 10. Biological assets and produce are recognized when 3 of the following are relevant. Number 1, the entity controls the asset due to past events. Number 2, its probable future economic benefits associated with the asset will arise to the entity. And number 3, the fair value or cost of the asset can be measured, and it needs to be reliably. When a biological asset is recognized, it should be measured at fair value less cost to sell. And when biological produce is recognized, it should be measured at fair value less cost to sell at point of harvest. Now below on the screen, I've taken a screenshot of Aurora Cannabis Incorporated. They are on the Toronto Stock Exchange. And I took a screenshot of them, their notes, to show how they've done a good job of showing how they account for and how they measure their biological assets. So as we can see from the screenshot, just reading in the bottom, biological assets are measured at fair value less cost to sell at the end of each reporting period in accordance with IAS 41. So here, Aurora Cannabis does a good job of disclosing and showing how they are measuring of their biological assets and how they are doing it in accordance with IAS 41. This is the reasoning as to why I've provided it. And as for recognition, we can go through all 3 of these requirements. Number 1, the entity controls the asset due to past events. It's clear that Aurora Cannabis has control of these cannabis plants. Number 2, its probable future economic benefits associated with the assets will arise to the entity. Well, Aurora Cannabis uses these plants to make their product, and then they use this product to make profit off of, and this goes to show that its probable future economic benefits are associated with this asset. And then next, the fair value or cost of the asset can be reliably measured. This goes on to our next slide. This is another screenshot from Aurora Cannabis's notes. And this is going to show how they are coming to their fair value measurement. Per IAS 41, this is going to be in section 15. Fair value measurement may be done by grouping assets or produce according to their attributes. And as we can see from this screenshot, Aurora Cannabis does a very good job of this. They use attributes such as average selling price per gram, standard cost per gram to complete production, and this is how they're coming to a fair value measurement. And they're showing this in their notes, and they're also using attributes that are used in their market. So as we can see, they do a good job of disclosing this and showing this in their notes of how they came to a reliable fair value measurement. Next up, I'm just quickly going to talk about gain and losses. A gain or loss on initial recognition of biological assets at fair value less cost to sell, along with changes in fair value less cost to sell during a period, are added in profit or loss. And this is similar with produce. A gain or loss on initial recognition on produce at fair value less cost to sell are also included in profit or loss. Now you may be asking, how is the gain or loss happening on initial recognition on these biological assets or produce? Well, a gain or loss can occur on initial recognition due to harvesting.
What follows are the general standards for disclosure for IAS 41. Any aggregate gains or losses for biological assets and produce must be reported, as well as descriptions for each group of biological assets. Consumable assets, which are assets to be harvested or sold, as well as bare plants, which we had gone over earlier, and mature and immature assets, much like the calf and the cow that you see on the slide here. Any assets that are restricted or used for security for liabilities must be disclosed as well as any commitments for asset development or acquisition, and reconciliations for biological assets and produce. Another important change that is often reported is biological transformation, which is the growth, degeneration, production, and procreation of biological assets. And those standards are assuming that fair value can be reliably measured. But what if it can't? If it cannot be measured, the entity must disclose the asset description as well as why it cannot be measured reliably. They must provide a range of estimates as well as disclose any carrying amounts, accumulated depreciation, and the method it was depreciated with. If fair value is able to be measured during a period, they must disclose the description of the biological asset, why it is now able to be measured reliably, and the effect of the change.
One of the companies that we've chosen to do an example on is Imperial Ginseng Product. This is a ginseng business that is headquartered in Vancouver, British Columbia, but the processing facility is Ontario. This company is also listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange, which is a TSX, and goes under the symbol of IGP.V. Per IAS 41, paragraph 40, it states, and also circling back to slide 8, where we spoke about disclosing for aggregate gains or loss for biological assets. Imperial Ginseng, in their financial statements of cash flows, indicate the disclosure of loss that arose from abandonment of biological assets, in which are measured at fair value less cost to sell, according to Note 4 in the consolidated financial statements for year-end 2021. And here we can see loss and abandonment of biological assets, which has been disclosed with its carrying amount of $3,978,109 in 2021 under the consolidated statement of cash flows. In addition, Imperial Ginseng has also disclosed their definition of biological assets. Here it states the company's biological assets consist solely of ginseng crops. Ginseng crops consist of immature, near maturity immature crops. Immature crops are measured at historical costs, as there are no markets for these crops. Near maturity crops are measured using the discounted expected future cash flow method, when the cost to complete the crops and the future selling prices of ginseng can be reasonably estimated. Mature crops are measured at estimated fair value less expected cost to harvest and sell. And the following table here presents the fair value of each category of the crops as of June 30, 2021 and 2020. And as per IAS 41, paragraph 43, ginseng has disclosed and provided quantified description of each group of biological assets, as presented here, distinguishing the carrying amounts of immature ginseng crops, near maturity crops, and mature ginseng crop assets in Note 10 of their consolidated financial statements for year-end 2021.
So under government grants under IAS 41, an entity is eligible to receive a government grant relating to biological assets. But these government grants are measured at fair value less cost to sell. These grants may only be recognized for a profit or loss once that government grant is officially receivable. There also may be conditional government grants may be recognized for profit or loss, but these government grants may only be recognized once those conditions have been met. Under this standard, there are also government grants relating to biological assets that may be measured at cost less accumulated depreciation or any impairment loss. This standard would not, IAS 41 would not apply to that. They would be assessed by using IAS 20. So moving on to our example here, our first example actually, Aura Cannabis, they do a great job in their notes here, disclosing what government grant they have received, as well as, which I really do prefer, that they do use an account, they describe their accounting policy. So under their policy, they discuss government's grants related to income are recognized as other gains and losses under the statement of comprehensive loss, while government grants related to assets, including non-monetary grants at fair value, are recognized as a reduction of related assets carrying amount. So this is nice because it tells you exactly where it will be recognized. But what I want to draw our attention to is the last paragraph and the second image here. So during the year end, June 30th, 2021, the company received a $3.6 million government grant relating to the installation of heat and power systems, which reduce electricity consumption from a city power grid. That grant was recognized against the asset and reduced the carrying value by $3.6 million. Note 11. So going back to IAS 41, under government grants, it's usually related to a biological asset. We do know where cannabis has biological assets, but with this grant, it may not necessarily be relating directly to that biological asset because they received the grant for an installation of pretty much a generator to help the heat and power of the system, which reduce electricity consumption from a city power grid. So this may go under IAS 20. Our second example we use is Imperial Ginseng. They also disclose their government subsidies. They don't go into detail with their accounting policy, but they do show here that in 2021 they received $2.74 million from agri-stability and other programs and declined due to income. And these production facilities may receive this income due to situations in production loss, increased cost, and market conditions. We can assume that they received this grant because they had a production loss, which would directly be related to their biological asset. So they can disclose this under IAS 41. So going into disclosures, an entity must disclose the following as per government grants: the nature and extent of government grants recognized in the financial statements. So going back to our two examples that we did use, Aura Cannabis and Ginseng Imperial, they both did a great job of describing the nature and the extent of the government grant. That way we can assess if it's under IAS 20 or IAS 41. Also, the second part here would be to disclose unfulfilled conditions and other contingencies attaching to government grants. Going back to our examples, they did not discuss any conditions, so we would assume there was no conditions that they had not fulfilled or were to fulfill. And thirdly, a significant decrease in expected level of government grants. And going back to our examples, there wasn't much detail going into any future expected decrease in level of government grants. But thank you. That is our presentation. Hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you.